Remember beepers? Those little gadgets we thought, like, vanished with dinosaurs.
Mm-hmm.
Turns out they can still pack a punch, literally. We're diving deep into this whole bizarre story of exploding beepers in the recent Israel-Hamas conflict. Remember, back in early September, thousands of beepers, the ones Hamas fighters were using, just blew up. It caused total chaos and confusion.
It definitely caught everyone off guard.
Initially, I think everyone was like, whoa, super sophisticated cyber attack, right? Hackers somehow remotely detonated these things.
Yeah, that was a gut reaction for sure. In our digital world, that seems like the go-to answer. But the truth is, hacking a beeper remotely to make it explode, especially on that scale, highly unlikely.
Right.
To do that, you'd have to exploit weaknesses in the beeper's battery, and doing that remotely without, actually messing with the device beforehand. Incredibly tough.
So even with all our fancy tech and cybersecurity, something as basic as a battery, that's still a weak point.
Exactly. Even those huge tech companies, tons of resources, even they struggle with battery safety. Remember a few years back, that leading phone manufacturer, they had to recall, millions of phones? The batteries were catching fire.
Oh, yeah.
If a company with all the resources and experts can't always get batteries right, it makes you wonder, how likely is it someone could hack thousands of simple beepers and make them explode,
Okay, so if it wasn't some remote hack, how did these beepers become, like, ticking time bombs? What are we looking at?
Well, the theory gaining traction is a supply chain attack. Instead of hacking remotely, it seems the beepers were messed with before they even got to Hamas, either during manufacturing or maybe in transit.
Hold on, are we talking about someone intentionally rigging these beepers to explode?
That's what the evidence points to, yeah. Investigations found this tangled web of companies involved in how these beepers traveled. Some look like shell corporations, and there were definite attempts to mislead the people looking into it. It's like, imagine they order beepers through a company that seems totally legit, but it's a front. Then the components, maybe the batteries, get swapped out during manufacturing. They're replaced with messed up versions. No one knows until, boom.
Shell corporations, fake companies, shipments intercepted, and devices literally meant to blow up. This is like spy thriller stuff. How did they even start unraveling this?
It was a huge effort. They had to follow these beepers through a maze of companies and transactions. So many false leads, dead ends. Took a lot of digging, connecting seemingly random bits of information to find the truth.
But they did it.
They did.
I mean, obviously it's tragic, but purely strategically, they pulled it off. Which brings up another question that's been bugging me. Why were Hamas fighters using beepers in the first place? In our hyper-connected world, it seems so counterintuitive.
That's a great question, and it gets at a key security aspect we often forget about. Hamas leaders, they'd specifically warned their fighters not to use mobile phones. Surveillance, They saw beepers, especially those older ones, the unidirectional models, as a way to, stay off the radar.
So they went old school to avoid being tracked. How does that even work?
Older beepers, they only receive messages, they don't send anything out. That makes them hard to track from the sending end. And because they're not sending signals, you can't pinpoint their location. It's a classic example of how what we see as limits in technology can actually be used to someone's advantage.
So even now, with smartphones and constant connection going off the grid, using old tech could be a way to keep your privacy and security. I never thought of it like that. Makes you think about all those digital trails we leave, right? Every text, email, location tag.
Exactly. Every single digital interaction leaves a mark. This situation really shows the trade-offs we make when we want to be constantly connected.
This is already so much more complex than I thought it would be. But before we move on, can you remind me why Hamas wanted to dodge surveillance in the first place?
Hamas, as you know, is designated as a terrorist organization. They're constantly under threat of being watched by various intelligence agencies, and they need to communicate securely without being detected. Using beepers, as basic as they seem, gave them a level of security they felt they couldn't get with newer tech.
Okay, so Hamas was using beepers to avoid tracking, and someone figured out how to exploit that by tampering with those beepers. But this can't be just about Hamas, right?
Yeah.
What does it all mean for us, for everyday people? What can we learn from this whole bizarre event?
This incident is a powerful reminder. Security is a multifaceted thing. We often get stuck on cybersecurity, but this shows physical security and supply chain weaknesses. They're just as crucial. Remember the NotPetya attacks a few years back? Crippled businesses and governments. And they got in through a vulnerability in a software update. It wasn't some super complex hack. It was about using a weak link in the chain. Sometimes the simplest way in is the most effective.
So it's not just about the latest antivirus or a strong password. We need to think about the whole process, how something's made, transported, how it gets into our hands.
Exactly, and we can't just focus on digital security. This is a wake-up call that old tech isn't irrelevant today. We're rushing to get the newest gadgets, and we forget about those seemingly outdated technologies. But as we've seen, they can still be a big threat, especially when they're used in creative and unexpected ways.
So it's like everything old is new again. What other old tech could be used like this?
Think about stuff like analog radio systems, those hardwired communication lines, even things like physical mail, couriers. We think of those as obsolete in our digital world, but they might actually be immune to certain types of digital attacks. It's about understanding the limitations of both old and new tech and how those can be exploited. It's pretty wild, right? This whole thing makes us rethink what we assume about security in a world obsessed with the newest tech.
It really is a mind bender. We think we're so advanced, but then something as simple as a messed up beeper, it turns everything upside down.
Exactly. And it's not just about, cybersecurity or supply chains. This highlights a potential shift in the whole landscape of warfare. This mix of espionage, modern tech, and a little old tech for good measure could be a sign of things to come.
So are we talking about a new era of warfare where physical and digital are totally blurred, where anything goes?
It's a very real possibility. It raises all sorts of questions about how nations and organizations will adapt. How do you even defend against an enemy that can hit you from anywhere, using cutting-edge stuff, A&D seemingly obsolete tools?
Honestly, it's a bit unsettling. Makes you realize security is this constant cat-and-mouse game, always trying to stay one step ahead of whoever wants to harm us.
And that's exactly why this is so thought-provoking. It forces us to re-examine what we think about security and consider the full range of threats in a world where physical and digital are so intertwined.
Okay, so this whole beeper situation has really got me thinking. What stands out to you as the biggest takeaway from all of this?
For me, it's the challenge to how we see what a real threat is. We tend to fixate on those big cyber attacks, the ones that make headlines, like something out of a movie, right?
Right.
But sometimes the most effective strategies use our blind spots, the stuff we think is outdated or insignificant.
It's like that saying, the devil's greatest trick was convincing the world he didn't exist. We dismiss old tech as harmless, and then bam, it bites back.
Exactly. This whole thing really shows how important it is to be vigilant, to adapt. We got to constantly reassess our weaknesses, anticipate how our assumptions could be exploited, about what's dangerous and what's not.
So it's not just about keeping up with tech, it's about understanding the potential of the old stuff. The forgotten stuff, the things that seem harmless.
Precisely, and that's a valuable lesson for everyone, individuals and organizations. We need to broaden how we think about security and be ready for the unexpected.
I'm seeing a pattern here. It's not just about the tech itself, it's about how it's used. Sometimes, the most effective solutions are the ones that fly under the radar, the ones nobody expects.
You're absolutely right. We get caught up in the hype of new technology, but we have to remember, every technology has strengths and weaknesses. The key is to understand those and use the tech in a way that maximizes the benefits and minimizes the risks.
So we need to be more strategic with our tech choices. We can't just jump on the newest thing without thinking about the consequences.
Yeah.
We're looking for alternatives.
Exactly. And we have to be willing to challenge what we assume. Just because something is new or popular doesn't mean it's the best solution for every situation. Sometimes the best approach is to go against the grain, embrace the unexpected.
This whole beeper incident has opened up a Pandora's box of security stuff I never even considered.
And that's the whole point of a deep dive like this. It's about challenging assumptions, exploring new ideas, and coming away with a broader understanding of how complex the world is.
This is way more than just beepers now, isn't it?
It is. It's about understanding how security is changing in a world where tech is constantly evolving and where the lines between the physical and the digital are getting blurrier.
So how do we even begin to understand all of this? What can we do as individuals and organizations to stay ahead of the curve?
First step. Awareness. We got to be aware of how the threats are changing and what our own vulnerabilities are in our lives, our organizations.
Okay, awareness is key, but awareness alone isn't enough.
Right.
We need to take action, be proactive.
Exactly. Awareness is the base, but it's just the start. We have to turn that awareness into real actions. That might mean investing in better security measures, educating ourselves and our people about threats, or just being more careful about what we do online, how we use tech in our everyday lives.
So it's a multi-pronged approach. Be aware, be proactive, be adaptable, think critically, challenge our assumptions.
Precisely. And remember, security isn't a destination, it's a journey. It's ongoing, learning, adapting, evolving as the world changes.
This deep dive has been so eye-opening. I feel like I have this whole new understanding of how complex security is in our world.
And that's the goal, isn't it? To expand our knowledge, challenge our viewpoints, and give us the power to make better decisions about how we use and interact with technology.
It's definitely made me rethink some of my own tech habits. I'm going to be a lot more careful about what I click, what information I share, how I protect my own digital footprint.
That's a good step. Every little thing we do to improve our own security helps create a safer world for everyone.
So it's not just about protecting ourselves, it's about our communities, society as a whole.
Exactly. Security is a collective responsibility. We all have a part to play in building a more secure and resilient world.
You've given us a lot to think about. But before we wrap up, I want to go back to something you said earlier about understanding the why behind these attacks. Why would someone go through all this, tampering with beepers, causing chaos?
That's a question that deserves more attention. It's easy to just call this terrorism and move on, but I think there's more to it than that. I think there's a deeper story here, one that speaks to why people do what they do and how conflict is changing in the 21st century.
So there's a human element here that goes beyond the technology. We need to understand the motivation, the reasoning behind these actions.
Absolutely. We often see technology as the driving force behind these attacks. But we have to remember, tech is a tool. It's humans who make the decisions, set the goals, carry out the actions.
So to really get this incident and what it means for the future, we have to delve into the human psyche. We have to explore motivations, ideologies, the personal stories behind these actions.
Exactly. And that's where it gets really interesting. Because when you start peeling back those layers, you often find the lines between good and evil, right and wrong, they aren't so clear. Understanding why people do things can really shed light on why events like this happen.
It's like that quote from The Dark Knight. You either die a hero or you live long enough to see yourself become the villain.
Exactly. Perspective is everything. And when we're talking security, it's crucial to see all sides, to understand what drives both the attackers and the defenders.
This is getting pretty deep. Makes you realize security isn't just about technology. It's about psychology, sociology, even philosophy. It's about understanding the human condition in all its messiness.
And that's what makes this field so fascinating and so challenging. It's constantly changing, and it requires us to think critically, adapt to new information, and be open to different ways of seeing things.
I feel like we've only just scratched the surface here. There's so much more to unpack when it comes to why people do these kinds of attacks.
Oh, absolutely. It's a rabbit hole, that's for sure. You start digging and you end up questioning everything. The lines between what's right and wrong, they can get really blurry.
Okay, I'm already feeling a little overwhelmed.
Yeah.
But before we go too far down that rabbit hole, let's zoom out for a sec. Big picture. What does this whole beeper thing, this mix of old tech and modern tactics, tell us about the future of warfare, global security, all that?
This incident, it raises a lot of questions about what's coming next. Will we see more of these unconventional moves? Will old tech become a regular part of warfare? And how will governments, organizations, everyone adapt?
So we're kind of speculating here, but based on what we've learned, what are some scenarios, some possibilities that might play out in the next few years?
One possibility is that we see these hybrid attacks become more common. Adversaries combining low-tech tactics with sophisticated cyber stuff to exploit vulnerabilities and cause chaos. Imagine a coordinated attack, disrupting infrastructure, spreading disinformation on social media, and then using seemingly harmless devices like those beepers to carry out physical attacks. It wouldn't be about brute force, but about finding and exploiting the weakest points.
That sounds terrifyingly possible. It's like a worst-case scenario. Everything's vulnerable, and we don't even know where to start defending.
It's a scenario we have to be ready for. We can't afford to be complacent. We have to be proactive in finding those potential threats and figuring out strategies to counter them. This means rethinking our whole approach to security, looking at all the angles and expecting the unexpected.
So it's not just about improving cybersecurity. It's about a more holistic view of security, one that includes physical infrastructure, social media, even those seemingly harmless technologies we tend to ignore.
Exactly. We have to think outside the traditional boundaries. Consider how different systems and technologies are connected and how those connections can be exploited. We also need to be more agile, more adaptable, able to react quickly to unexpected threats. We can't just rely on static defenses. We need to be flexible, dynamic in our approach.
This all sounds incredibly complex and overwhelming. Where do we even begin? It feels like we're trying to fight a ghost, an enemy we can't see and don't fully understand.
It starts with education. We need to educate ourselves, our colleagues, our communities, about how the threats are evolving and how important it is to be aware of security. We can't just assume someone else is taking care of it. We all have a responsibility here.
So, knowledge is power. The more we know about the threats and how to protect ourselves, the better off we are.
Exactly. And we need to build a culture of collaboration, of sharing information, where different organizations and agencies can work together to find and address potential threats. This isn't something one group can handle alone. It takes a collective effort.
Sounds like we need to be more proactive, less reactive when it comes to security. Instead of waiting for something bad to happen, we need to anticipate those threats and take steps to prevent them from happening in the first place.
Exactly. We need to shift our whole mindset from reaction to prevention. This means changing how we think, being willing to embrace new ideas and approaches, and committing to constantly learning and adapting.
So it's not just about the technology, it's about people. Changing our behavior, working together to create a more secure environment.
Absolutely. Technology is only as good as the people using it. We need to invest in training and education, making sure our workforce has the skills and knowledge to deal with this increasingly complex world of security. We also need to be mindful of our own actions and how they affect our security, both as individuals and as a group.
This deep dive has really emphasized how important it is to stay informed, to be proactive. We can't just sit around and wait for something bad to happen. We have to be constantly learning, adapting, evolving our security strategies. It's like a never-ending game of chess, always thinking a few moves ahead.
And we have to be willing to challenge our assumptions. The world's changing fast, and what worked yesterday might not work tomorrow. We need to be open to new ideas, new approaches, and we need to be constantly asking ourselves, are our current security measures really effective? Especially in this environment that's always changing.
This has been an incredible conversation. You've really opened my eyes to how complex security is. In a world where the lines between physical and digital are becoming more and more blurred, I feel like I have a whole new perspective.
And that's what a good deep dive should do. Challenge your thinking, expand your horizons. The more we learn, the better prepared we are to deal with the challenges of the world and to help create a safer, more resilient future.
You've definitely achieved that. I'm walking away from this with more questions than answers, but also with a renewed sense of urgency and a commitment to be more proactive about my own security and to encourage others to do the same.
That's a great takeaway. This deep dive wasn't about giving you all the answers. It was about starting a conversation, getting you to think critically about security and what it means for our lives and our society.
It's definitely done that. I'm going to be thinking about this for a long time. But before we wrap up, is there one final thought, one key takeaway you want to leave our listeners with?
Remember, knowledge is power. The more we understand about the world, the better we can handle its challenges and work towards a safer, more resilient future for ourselves and for generations to come.
Well said. And on that note, I think it's time to wrap up this deep dive. I want to thank you, our expert, for sharing your insights and expertise, and for guiding us through this complex and thought-provoking topic.
It's been my pleasure. I always enjoy getting to share my passion for security and encouraging others to explore this fascinating, constantly evolving field.
And to our listeners, thank you for joining us on this journey. We hope this deep dive has given you a new perspective on security and inspired you to stay informed and be proactive in protecting yourselves and your communities.
Stay curious, stay vigilant, and never stop learning about the world around you.
Until next time, stay safe.